Okay, good afternoon. Water Management Committee meeting, 6 November. Wow, 3 o'clock. I don't see anybody in the queue. I don't see anybody in the audience. We do have one on the phone. Do we have any comments from the public? Oh, nothing coming in. Okay. We'll keep that open if they want to come in. How about from the committee?
None.
None from the committee. Okay, we'll jump right into the GA. I'm not sure who's going to.
I would normally defer to Chuck on this, and I don't really have much to report, so I think we'll discuss further at the regular board meeting next week. It'll be on Tuesday.
Because
Monday's
GA
holiday.
meeting this week or?
No, GA meeting will be next Wednesday. Our meeting will be on Tuesday.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah.
All right, so we'll just hear from Chuck then. Potential impact of recycled water. Is that also yours?
That one would be mine. So I think we can talk about that and alternative water sources at the same time, because the current plan is to eventually bring to the board sort of a proposal to study where we can put water from a recycled water project into the basin. We're also starting the beginnings of negotiations with the city about a formal agreement that would lock down that water source for us. And we've talked to GA about that as well. So those are just initial discussions. But, the GA did come out and say, if the water district wants to run with recycled water, and I think we're taking them up, and we're going to go through a methodical process to look at costs, feasibility, how to get it done, all the wickets. And then if in the adjudication, it turns out that that is a feasible project to help achieve sustainability, it's in the best interest of the water district, and we can get the right financing and all the other good stuff, we will move forward on that project, or not if it's not the right economic project for the valley. But there's a lot of work to get to that point just to make that decision.
So far, you're receiving a receptive audience from the city on this? Or?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I did talk to the GA, and there's an agreement between the GA, the Navy, and the city currently about the recycled water, and it sort of commits it to the GA for some reason. But the GA, of course, has sat in their meetings publicly and said, well, we'll have the water district. They've decided to step back from that project. So to step into that void, we need some sort of agreement. That's one of the starting moves. And we've had positive feedback from both the GA and the city on that.
Have you seen any indications of what the Navy or city's desires for a portion of that recycled water for their agriculture or for their irrigation?
I can only go off the current agreement, which I think gives something like 600 acre feet a year to the Navy to continue Tui chub habitat, sort of. There's water they use for the habitat and perhaps for the golf course as well, as something like that. I mean, I don't remember the exact number, but
I think that's the extent of the Navy's involvement. There's a certain amount of water that we have to have for the environment. And I forget what it was. It's a certain amount, 400, 5, I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But that's it. Yeah.
So we'll have to have those discussions.
And the Arresty agreement is basically what the GA tried to do is say, okay, we're going to make that water available to both Sales Valley Minerals and water districts if you sign this contract saying you can have the water. If you take the water, we'll deduct that from the amount that you have to pay a replenishment fee on. But however, we're also going to make it sure that this state, what you're saying here is that in no way, shape, or form you'll ever sue or challenge anything the GA is doing. So neither, obviously, Sales Valley or us sign that, because we wouldn't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the agreement I think you're talking about that exists.
It's something like that. And it's so in our view of the world, this is ultimately an agreement between us and the city, because it's really the city's and the Navy's water. The GA doesn't really have they have to sort of back out of this agreement they already have, but then let us move forward with the city.
And you're going to try and get him to do that. He's going to basically, as I understand it, approach GA, say, if you want us to take this on as a potential project, then you need to release your grip on that, that wastewater.
Yeah, because we can't make multi-million-dollar investments without assurance that we're going to get the water to make it work.
Right.
And that we'll get the benefit from it.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to get my head around, because I remember the numbers that uh, have been submitted, some people say 2,000 acre feet and some people will say 1,500 and.
It's all over. I've seen it 22, 23, 2000. Lately, Phil Hall's been saying it's 1,500 or 1,000, and it's just all over the place. So
That's
yeah.
all before the allocations that the Navy might be expecting and perhaps the alfalfa farm in Ridgecrest or.
They were touting originally after Navy gets their part, there'd be 2,100 available.
Yeah. And there was an interesting thing that Renee was letting me know about. So we're talking about the general plan and recycled water, and the GA has this sort of assumption that like, oh, okay, given the growth figures, and the GA has talked about this a lot. Like, well, we use the water district's general plan and the information that we've generated to determine the growth that we project for the future. And I believe, Renee, you told me that those are actually state requirements that we have to meet. So like, we don't get to say what we think the growth is going to be based on our local, we have to sort of adopt this census-based county-wide growth thing, even if it doesn't fit our local area. Is
Kern
that
County
correct?
Council of Governments.
That's right. That's right.
That
But
we have to go by what?
I thought it turned to be like 1%
It
per
is.
year increase.
Yeah, and so,
Yeah, which isn't a lot.
so
Yeah.
it's not a lot, but what the GA has done is they're like, oh, over 50 years, you're going to get to this giant number of people. And we go like, well, and what they've said is like, oh, that's the water district's data. Well, it's not necessarily our data. It's what the state requires in that specific plan. And it's not, we don't have an option to say, we don't agree with that growth number.
It's
Which is
the same
interesting.
growth rate the Realtor Association uses is 1% increase in housing units a year. I think they use the same thing.
So it's just, it was just one of those things that they said, and, they sort of, I think the inference was that we created that number based on our own projections. Really, it's just, we're just following what the state tells us to do.
The general plan goes through that. And it's interesting because it also goes back and looks at like the general plan we did in 1990 and 1997. And in 1990, we were projecting in 30 years, we'd have like over 100,000 people here.
Really?
Obviously.
I think they missed that
Plans
projection.
are living documents and then
Yeah.
they can be revised.
Oh, yeah, the
Yeah.
documents. Yeah, I like
But-
that idea, living documents.
Yeah, so Renee has a wealth of great information and stuff like that, because, you
So let me clarify what the next step is in calculating, getting to a cost idea that we can use to determine if this is a feasible project. So you're going to work with Chuck Krieger, and are you going to work with CEC as well?
yes.
Or how are we going to come, and somehow we're going to come together, which isn't obviously the final cost of the project, but a very good ballpark range to say, here's what we think it's going to cost, and here's what the benefits could be in cost per acre foot. You want to get to that point before you go any farther.
Yes, and so let me sort of see if I can lay that out, how it looks. So like, we know that the city's gonna treat the wastewater to
Secondary.
secondary, so we will have to pay to treat it to tertiary and then advanced treatment. And the advanced treatment that we have to
Yeah.
produce the water to depends on whether we can percolate it into the basin or whether we can inject it, because I think injection requires a higher level of treatment. So step one is you got to figure out, are we going to percolate or are we going to inject? That's going to be likely Tim Parker and Ramble type folks going out there looking at, can we do? Because if we can get it to percolate, I think we can have a less costly project. So you have to first figure out, how can we get the water into the aquifer, which is data we want to share, the science. that we wanna
Just
share
one
with-
quick question, and
Right.
when you say percolate, we don't mean just spreading it on a pond, do we?
Yes.
Or do we talk
exactly
about
what
some
we
kind of boreholes that would actually get it partially in, or just spreads out?
It depends on what the science tells us.
Okay.
So I've
fine.
talked to Tim Parker, and
Fine.
it's, so like, there are places where, like, I was talking to the city, there's a place they know of, and there's a place up in Little Lake where you can dump tons and tons of water and it's gone like that. So there are places where the water just goes straight down and it doesn't
Yeah.
pond up. We don't know if we can find one of those places convenient that's in the right spot, or whether it's gonna, the percolation, we lose so much evaporation because the percolation is so slow that it doesn't make it feasible, or potentially there are layers of clay below it that won't allow the water to get into the deeper aquifer where we need it, and then we might need to do injection, but that's a study. And so we'll come to the board first with sort of like, this is what it's going to take to find the answer to that question. And then there's going to be sort of a scoping of like, this is what we'll have our contractors do, sort of a cost estimate. Like, if we went from their secondary treatment to whatever it takes to get it into the water. And those will all come to the board, and they'll come with costs, and you guys will approve various aspects of that project. And so that's going to start happening in the next couple of months. So what we're going to come to you with is, just sort of this is what we think this study will cost, and this is the milestone it'll get us to. And, then we'll move forward, and we're only going to move forward until, as long as it makes sense to do so. But, we want to be prepared. And there's some side benefits. If we find that percolation or injection works, we might be able at some point to be able to capture, LADWP overflows like we were not able to do in the past and get them into the aquifer as well. Or potentially water from Little Lake could be somehow filtered into the aquifer as well. So those are other ways that we can, start to look at, like, how can we capture water and get it into the aquifer. But it starts with the science of, can we do it? And we believe, based on our discussions with El Paso, Texas, who was doing injection and then switched to percolation, where they just had these big ponds. And they said, really, for them, it was like understanding that if they just dug down deep enough and got below this caliche layer, this hard pan layer, that it would percolate just fine and go down into the aquifer. But we have to do the science to see if that's feasible here.
Typical me, I'm always worried about the cost. That's why Ty and I get along so well. I'm always worried about the cost. Now, it sounds to me like this would be part of the physical solution as one of the corrective actions, and if necessary. It could be, and it probably should be, because the physical solution should have in their potential projects, if we got to increase our water import, water requirements into the valley. So my question is, how much do we want to spend to get it to the point where we can put it into the physical solution? At that particular point, then, it could be something that money would be collecting through pumping fees or over pumping fees that would help offset and pay for the project, because that's the whole idea of physical solution, be able to collect money from those people who pump beyond their amount that is being water rights. If they pump above, they pay a certain amount of money that help finance these projects, or you may be collecting. So I guess the question I'm asking is, how can we keep everything to a minimum to get it into that point where, hey, this is a viable project, and we're going to make it part of the physical solution, and it's going to be there in our hip pocket ready to do.
Yeah. So that's why we're not ready for prime time yet.
Okay.
We're just giving you a briefing because Krieger and Stewart is working on rough estimates of, like, what the various phases of that project might look like, what they might cost. And we'll come to the board, and, if we're going to have to, we have the luxury of, we have a new source of water supply sort of bank account. It's got $2 million. I think, Ty, you said we put $10,000 a month into that. And so it's for new sources of water. So that money is sitting there to generate, but it's, in today's world, $2 million may not go that far, but that's probably where we'll be asking the board to approve the funding to come from. It's the rational, logical place to do it. But, we want to make sure we're certainly not going to tap that fund out, because, as we go through this process, if you get to the point where you really have to do design, we're going to have to go out and find grants and funding, and so that's something else we'll have to look at over time. Like, when is the right time to start looking? And I think you talked about having a shovel-ready project at some point when you go to look at grants.
How far do you need to get it before you go out for grants?
So we're going to have to figure all that stuff out.
Yeah, and that'll be worked out. So we're talking about some costs to get us to some point to say, this is feasible. The cost per acre foot makes it feasible. And before we move on, here's what we need to do, or here's what our plans are to move on. Okay.
Well, I like we're going forward with all options still.
Oh, God,
on
yeah.
the table. So that's, I was a little worried that we might just sidestep percolation, because I know Krieger and Stewart did look at percolation before and came back with some cautions, but they didn't spend as much time as we're proposing now. So.
Yeah. And so, there's other things like the work that we've done to study the aquifer extensively has allowed our consultants to reassess, where this might be feasible, because now we have a better understanding where the clay layer is underneath and where percolation could happen and by what mechanism. So that science was a stepping stone to the science we will do next.
That's what I was going to ask. We already have this good static model. We're going to have a dynamic model, and they can use that to figure some of these areas out.
Yeah, and do predictive modeling of, like, what happens to aquifer if this, if we're injecting it at point A versus point B, and how does that help mitigate, aquifer decline. So all that stuff will be considered
All right.
ultimately, but it's a long process, but we're getting started.
Do
And we
have-
may,
do we have a rough schedule laid out, or are we?
I would say I would, just off the top of my head, I'd say probably 5 years worth of planning effort before you'd be at the point where you're ready to put a shovel in the ground. That sound about right, Renee? I mean, by the time you do studies and whatnot.
Yeah, because really you're gonna want to do a feasibility study first.
right.
And then it might take some time.
That,
to
that's a
look
novel idea. Let's do the feasibility study first. Wow.
Economic study.
Let's do a cost analysis. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then, there might be a process of applying for finding grant money and things like that. That takes time
right.
before you can, put shovel into dirt and do a pilot study.
So,
So
so
I have-
it's a lengthy process, but the deadline from the state's 2040, so that's 16 years from now. So there's plenty of time to get it done.
And it depends on the adjudication too, what happens with that in the physical
Of course.
solution, how much time you have, what you do and how you do it. Yeah,
So you're saying I'm going to have to run again?
Of course.
absolutely. We already got your papers in for you. I'll be sunning on the beach somewhere, so I'll call in. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for that, George.
Is there someone on the line? Did you say there's someone, are they calling in?
They
Or
may
just
just be listening.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure they were calling
They're
in.
just eyeballing us.
Okay. Okay, they're not raising, oh, you have a thing up there. Oh, nice, yeah.
Little pyramid there. Okay, well, that brings us to future agenda items. Do you have anything?
No, we're on alternate water sources.
Oh, I thought you were covering that at the same time.
That was sort of the same.
Oh,
I think
then,
we did both.
and then, one thing that we always had on there was optionally capture of the LADWP water. Do we want to have that on there under alternate water? Because that's something you're still going to be discussing with them and
It's
how we
going to
could
be
do
a
that.
factor that we'll be looking at in this sort of percolation injection study of how to get water if it were ever to be, so like the location of where we choose, and it'll be cited and there'll be considerations for like the potential to capture LADWP overflows if they ever can.
So you don't want
that
to
way.
keep it as an alternate water source?
Yeah, I think,
As
I
an
think it's
agenda
fine.
item? I'll leave it up
Yeah.
to you if you want to put, that's up to you if you want to put it on an agenda like that.
Yeah.
I just don't want to forget
I-
about it. We've been talking LADWP for, gosh, as long as I can remember.
No, I agree. I
Yeah.
mean, George gave us a preface that he was going to talk about both those at the same
Okay,
time.
I'm sorry, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah,
But yeah, we'll keep it separate here because it may be other than LADWP as an alternate water supply.
right, yeah.
Issue in the future. So I think we need to keep our eyes open and
Yeah, I mean, we need to keep our eye on Little Lake. We know there's runoff there. We have to figure out if that's newer water or not. There's still a little bit of work to be done there too. So all those things have to be factored into the where.
If we can make ourselves I say, I don't want to use the word primary, but the selected location when they overflow where they dump water
Mm.
and be prepared for it, I think that's important. I mean, it could happen anytime and even if it's just a lot of excavation work and things like that, which would go in what you're saying.
Yeah.
We would want to do the excavation, direct the water where it can percolate.
yeah, where it's going to be easiest to capture.
Capture and
different
monitor and all that, yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you want, and that's up to you because you're the chair and I shouldn't even be here, Chuck should be. Should that be under alternate water sources? So we don't lose track of it?
Sure, we can
So,
add
yeah,
that.
somehow put something on there
Yeah.
that we at least don't, even if it's, hey, nothing's occurred, that we don't lose track of it because we've been
Right.
talking about it for years. Yeah,
Yep, indeed. And any of us could get hit by a bus. So
that's right. Or end up retired and yeah. Or down under somewhere. Yeah,
we're down under.
yeah.
Okay, well, future agenda items. Anything, Ron?
Nope.
We'll call the meeting at 3:18.
Thank you.
Thank you much for your participation and inputs and
Did you throw shrimp on the Barbie while you were down there?